Hey there, special educators. Welcome to Autism Academy 360, a podcast to making your job as special education teachers easier. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Abby, a behavior specialist. And together, we have over 25 years of special education experience.
And I'm a veteran autism teacher. We both are passionate about empowering you with practical teaching strategies and actionable tips and tricks that will help you thrive in your role.
Whether you're a seasoned educator looking for fresh insights, a newbie navigating your first classroom, or a parent of a neurodivergent child, this podcast is your go-to resource for all things autism.
So let's get started with today's episode.
Hey, it's Abby. We're going to talk about working with your team and how to make it the most effective way that it can. So I know for me and for many of the teachers that I work with, we didn't learn how exactly to run a classroom with other adults in it, how to train those other adults, how to sort of manage other adults, because it really didn't even seem like it would be part of our job description. But at the end of the day, we know for our classrooms to run efficiently and effectively, we are having to manage some other adults. Now, this can be uncomfortable. It can be very awkward feeling, but it doesn't have to be. And if you go about it in a really strategic way, you're going to have a really efficient classroom. You're not going to be frustrated. The teaching assistants or paraprofessionals that work in your room aren't going to be frustrated, and everyone is going to be more successful. So what am I talking about? I am talking about this strategy called behavioral skills training. You might hear it sometimes called BST for short. And it's a really great way in training other adults. There's a lot of research behind it. It also works for students, but we're really going to be talking about just adults here. Now, being in a behavior specialist role, this is something that I do daily. So I can promise you that it is something that is going to be super effective in your classroom. So there are 4 steps in doing this. Now, it's not going to be just a one and done. It's not a one-day thing. This is a gradual procedure that you have to do over and over again and revisit. So just to break it down really quick, the 4 steps are instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. Okay, so there's 4 different stages, and we are going to break down each one of those and talk a little bit about some of the places where you might find some roadblocks. So the first one is what I think a lot of people already do, the instruction phase. So this is when you sit down with your team and you're going to tell them what you are working on. Maybe you are teaching them a way to do a specific type of prompt and you are trying to model it. Or maybe you're trying to show them how to implement a token economy and you're giving all the specifics. You want the directions here to be really clear and concise. I have found that I just say, I'm going to pretend like you don't know anything because I'm not sure what you do know and what you don't know. So some of this might be review, but I'm going to pretend like you're a blank slate. And in saying that, it takes a little bit pressure off for them to ask more questions. And I don't have to assume that they know anything or some of them know things and skip over some really important steps. So it might feel like I'm really going back to basics at the beginning, but I find that it is so important to get everyone on the same page with those basic steps so everyone enjoys it and it's a refresh for those that know it. During this time, you're going to want to also pair talking about it with maybe some visual written directions. I think that this is really important for people to be able to refer back to, because if you're doing something for the first time, there's going to be a lot of information to process and you are going to get frustrated when people forget about parts of it. So if you have it written down, it's going to be an easy place to refer to. What I also like to show during this time is any visual or physical supports that you're going to be using. If you are talking about using a token economy, what does that look like? What do the token pieces look like? Are you using a behavior chart? What does that look like? Be really specific. Then you move into the modeling phase. So basically, this means that you, the expert, are going to demonstrate in real time how this would look. So if you are doing it, you can either do it with a role playing situation with another adult and have the other ones look on. Or if it's your student and you feel comfortable and it's the right situation, you could do it with your student and again, have the adults watch. This is great because sometimes things get lost in translation just by verbally describing something. I might be picturing it a little bit differently from the next person. So when you have a model of it, it's so much more powerful, and anyone watching can ask follow-up questions or clarification. This might be tricky just because of things like time. If you are going to be working with a student, you are going to take 2 adults possibly for 1 student, which means you might need to figure out something for your other students in the meantime. That's why I really like doing it with adults and role playing and taking turns role playing so that everyone gets to see. It also can be a little bit uncomfortable if you don't really know your teammates that well, but building up that rapport with your team can help make it more comfortable down the road. Then comes the rehearsal phase. So this time you are going to watch the people that you are training do what you're asking them. So I really like to suggest watching them in action with the student. The reason being is when you are doing it with adults, it's not going to be as lifelike, right? We're going to follow the directions. We're not going to most likely have a problem behavior. So I like watching it with the adults. During this time, I tried to take some data. So again, if we're talking about using a token economy, and we said that we want the students to earn a token about every 3 minutes, I'm going to be taking data to see if they are really doing that, because 3 minutes can go really fast when you're working with a student and you can lose total track of time. So having the data is really helpful for the discussion when you move into the next step, which is the feedback phase. Now, I feel as though this is a critical piece of the behavioral skills training. So this is when you sit down and you give feedback, both good and not bad, but ways to improve on the skill that you're teaching. Now, again, this is really hard. You and I, we probably didn't go to school to critique other adults. It's very uncomfortable. So how do you overcome it? You do a few things. One, you have to make sure you have a great relationship with that person and you are constantly working on that. Now, sometimes you might not have a good relationship with the person, but you can't avoid this step. So if that happens, always lead with the positives. Even if someone is maybe struggling with this skill that you're teaching, you can always find something positive. And I encourage you to always start there with at least 1, maybe 2, even more. And then move into the constructive feedback. So try to take emotion out of that. And you can really do that by using your data. Say, oh, I see that this happened, X, Y, and Z, and I need this to happen instead. And when you have the data there, it takes the blame off you. Like, they can be mad at the data. They don't have to be mad at you. And I have found that really helpful. And don't beat around the bush around this. It's more uncomfortable when we are trying to work around it. And again, things are going to get lost in translation. If you want behavior of the adults to change, you have to be really explicit. Just like with our students, we don't want to be vague. We want to tell them exactly what we want to see. Now, this is the final step, technically, of behavior skills training, but you always need to go back. So once you give that feedback, you need to go back and watch the team do whatever you are requiring of them. Again, you have to keep that going. Now, again, this goes back to time. How can you do this? Sometimes I like to do it in the classroom if I position myself in maybe a reading group near a group that I am trying to observe, and just keep a listening ear out to see maybe how the language is going or something like that. Sometimes I just try to be really creative in our scheduling during the day. And I've even reached out to admin to be like, hey, can I get a sub for half a day so I can do this and really make sure that everyone's on the same page? And a lot of times they have said yes, and that has been so encouraging and helpful. So just a quick recap. There are 4 steps in behavioral skills training. It is the instruction phase, and that's where you are giving those explicit directions. The modeling phase, where you are demonstrating yourself how to do the skill. Then the rehearsal phase, you are watching the team implement it on their own, and again, preferably with a student. And then finally, the feedback phase, where you are going to give them steps for improving or getting a little bit closer to what you expect, as well as giving some compliments and praise. Now, I hope that this is something that you can use in your classroom this fall and throughout the year. I know it can be challenging, so if you have any questions, you run into any trouble, I would love to troubleshoot with you. Just send me a message over at Mrs. Mo's Modifications. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Autism Academy 360. We hope that you've gained some tips and motivation to fuel your week ahead.
Before you go, don't forget to hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you want to show support, head to Apple Podcasts and leave your rating and review.
Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and most importantly, stay connected. We'll catch you in the next episode.